President Biden and Speaker McCarthy have apparently reached an impasse on debt ceiling talks, bringing negotiations to a grinding halt this morning. We're now less than 2 weeks away from a potential default. Meanwhile, Democratic senators continue to urge Joe Biden to use the 14th Amendment to avoid defaulting on the national debt. Let's hear what Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont had to say.
The president has the authority to use the 14th Amendment, and he should be prepared to do that, period.
Assistant law professor at Willamette University, Rowan Gray, joins now to weigh in. Rowan, it seems like somebody's going to have to budge here, right? Either McCarthy is going to have to agree to fewer spending cuts, or Biden is going to have to agree to any at all. Who do you think is going to flinch?
Well, the issue is that even if we may think McCarthy and the other Republicans are being completely outrageous and unreasonable, only Biden has a legal and constitutional responsibility to keep the checks that have already been authorized, keep the spending that's already been committed going out. So as far as the budget negotiations, both sides can continue to play chicken for as long as they want. But when it comes to the debt ceiling and the spending commitments that have already been appropriated by Congress, it's only Biden that actually has to blink and continue to spend. The question is whether he will use unilateral options as he is required to do or not.
Now, you've been pretty much the face of this, but there is an entirely legal option. It would, of course, be unconstitutional for the Treasury to make decisions about which to prioritize, whether it's, make good on Treasury spending or Social Security. That's not under their purview per the Constitution. But there is another option to mint a coin. Can you tell us a little bit about that third option?
Yeah, that's right. Biden doesn't have any constitutional power to selectively default, which is what prioritization really is. And the 14th Amendment says that the debts that have been incurred cannot be questioned, which is obviously also true. But until you've exhausted all the legal options available to you, you can't simply ignore the debt ceiling and continue to issue debt, because you have options to continue to honor both laws simultaneously. There isn't an actual contradiction until you've demonstrated that you've exhausted every other option. And the Coinage Act historically was never counted towards the debt ceiling. Any coins that were created do not count towards the debt ceiling. And we've had coins being issued since the birth of the Republic. The Mint is over 100 years older than the Federal Reserve and has been returning what they call seigniorage revenue, which is the amount of money that you create by issuing new money over the cost of creating the actual instruments themselves, has been returning seigniorage to the government to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars every year. So what the proposal is to use an existing provision of the Coinage Act that is relatively obscure but very clear in its language, that authorizes the Treasury Secretary to mint and issue platinum proof coins, proof meaning very shiny, high production grade, of whatever denomination the Treasury Secretary wants. So the idea is the Treasury Secretary could issue very high value coins up to maybe $1 trillion and use those as an alternative source of revenue than issuing bonds of up to, billions of dollars.
Earlier this week, former President Donald Trump said these people are crazy. This is the United States government. First of all, you never have to default because you print the money. I have to tell you, okay? Economics professor at Stony Brook University, Stephanie Kelton, wrote, "This resonated with a lot of people, 1 million views in less than 24 hours. Some of you said it was just Trump talking crazy, but this is really basic stuff."
Business investor Warren Buffett said, "We will pay our debts in the end. It's not like if we don't pay, we can't pay. We've got the right to print our own money. That's the key." Kelton added, "Bottom line, U.S. Treasuries, what we call the national debt, are just dollars with different maturity dates. When they mature, the government deletes the bond, debits the securities account, and prints a plain old regular dollar, credits a bank account." What do you make of this assessment of this situation, Rowan?
Yeah, I think the funny thing is that the Trump quote is actually from when he was engaged in the debt ceiling dispute back in, I think, 2016, 2017, and nobody cared when he said it. It was quite a non-event. And so the idea, the basic fact that we can always make money, and that, as even economists like Paul Krugman have said, the difference between running a deficit by issuing debt versus issuing straight up money is not economically significant. It's not the kind of hyperinflationary Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe thing that people often associate with it. In fact, it's pretty much economically identical to run a deficit by issuing debt versus issuing money. It's the equivalent of putting the money into a savings account versus a checking account. Do you feel richer? Do you feel like you've got millions of dollars to spend if your paycheck came into your savings account instead of your checking account? Probably not. It's the same amount of money at the end of the day, and that's what's important. So both Trump and Warren Buffett are correct, and the reality is that this is an accounting crisis. It's a completely manufactured balance sheet crisis, and it takes a balance sheet solution like an accounting gimmick like the coin.
You're right that Trump comment was a little bit older, but he is responding to the debt news now, writing on Truth Social, Republicans should not make a deal on the debt ceiling unless they get everything they want, including the kitchen sink. That's the way the Democrats have always dealt with us. Do not fold. Now, this is obviously a little bit different than what he was saying when he was president, and he acknowledged that in a recent CNN town hall, saying the only difference between his stance on raising the debt ceiling is that he was president then and he's not now. Do you think that he's right to say Republicans should stand firm?
I mean, I think at this point, Republicans are going to do what they've been elected to do, which is continue to play hardball until they go off a cliff or take the American economy and the public with them. I think the reality is that the only people who we should be putting pressure on right now are the Biden administration, because it's up to them to decide whether to take these Republican sort of terrorist demands seriously. If the Republicans are going to play hardball like this, Biden's response should be, I'm going to give you nothing. And I'm going to continue to honor all the spending commitments that I have been told to honor, and I don't need you. That's the way to make these demands go away, is to render them obsolete. But at this point, the Biden administration is so committed to a vision of compromise that they are willing to sit down with people who've got no interest in compromise and have said so quite clearly. They want everything they can. They don't care about protocol. They don't care about the health of the economy. And the only correct answer to that is to stop negotiating with them and do what you need to do.
So, Rowan, you've talked about this in great detail. This analogy of, okay, we had the prior Congress vote to spend X amount of dollars. They've created the budget. Now it's kind of like getting your credit card bill and saying, well, I'm going to change everything I've spent money on. You can't relitigate the prior Congress's spending, but that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make more cuts. That's McCarthy's plan. And so there's real consequences of default. Kamala Harris, rather, was in a Zoom conference and was asked about what the consequences of default would be, and she ended up dropping off of the conference before answering that question. What do you make of putting us in a position where we do default and the government isn't making good on its obligations? What are the consequences of that? And what position does that put Democrats or members of Congress in when it comes to, oh, well, now people are out of work, people aren't getting their Social Security checks, so just go with McCarthy's plan to get this done? Is that really the moral position they're trying to put us in?
I mean, it's the position a lot of them, I think, are going to find themselves in unless they grow a backbone and start thinking a little more strategically. But it's a terrible position to be in, because when they're talking about, quote unquote, prioritizing payments, what they really mean is we're going to make sure that the bond holders, the people holding the financial debt, will get paid first. But the people that won't get paid, as you said, are Social Security recipients, are government employees, are benefit recipients from all kinds of social programs who quite fairly need that money and are entitled to that money just as much as bondholders. So when they say prioritization, they mean prioritization of the financial sector over real people. And we are talking about a huge amount of pain. We are talking about a huge amount of austerity. We are talking about a huge amount of disruption. People's lives are going to be upended. Some people who are requiring this money to live are going to be in a really, really tough place. And it's all a manufactured crisis, because, to your point, the 14th Amendment, which was created during the Civil War specifically to prevent the Confederacy from getting back into Congress later and trying to refuse to honor all of the pensions of the Union soldiers that had won the war, to say, we don't want to let a future Congress invalidate a previous Congress's debts. You cannot come in later and undo what was previously committed. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're not talking about the budget for next year. We're not talking about the budget for 10 years from now. We are talking about previously incurred legislated debts that the very small number of Republicans who are holding out here don't want to honor. And it's against the Constitution, but it's also against good government.
Law professor William Ed Rowan Gray, thank you so much for helping us break this down.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We'll be back with more Rising after this.